Welcome to Pleasureology Island. I'm Free Thought Steve. Thanks for stopping by. Welcome to another session of the Pleasureology Island seminar for sex-positive humanistic psychology. Now, I've been happy that my channel has actually been getting a few people who have subscribed to the channel. I was really pleased about that. And I saw that one of my subscribers has his own YouTube channel. So I thought I would stop by that channel and see what he has to say. I'll call him Carl. That's not his real name. But he might not want to be outed as someone watching a sex-positive psychology show, particularly since I could tell from the videos on his YouTube channel that he's a Christian. And I was a little surprised that a Christian had signed up for my sex-positive psychology channel here. But that's great. That's wonderful. I think more Christians, we need more sex-positive Christians. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And in fact, if all Christians were just sex-positive and hell-negative, I think the rest of us would have no trouble at all with the Christians. We could get along with them just fine. So in any case, what Carl had to say, I saw that one of his videos was a video about the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? And that, grabbed my interest immediately because I've always been interested in the big questions, and there's no bigger question than what is the meaning of life, right? So Carl's idea is that the meaning of life is love. And so I thought, well, that sounds good to me. That's, as far as meanings of life go, love is an excellent choice. I wish everybody would choose love as their meaning of life. Golly, the world would be a much, much happier place. And then Carl pointed out something important. And he said that one of the main Christian principles is love your neighbor as yourself. You've all heard this. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's kind of like the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because when we love somebody, we want them to be happy. And so we want to behave toward them in a way that will make them happy. And so that's what it means, really, to say love your neighbor as yourself. And then Carl pointed out that if you think about that sentence, it assumes that you already love yourself before you love someone else in the same way that you love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, and then you love somebody else in the same way that you don't love yourself, then you don't love them. If you see what I mean. It's important for us to really love ourselves first. And in fact, this is one of the key principles of the human potential movement and humanistic psychology in general, is a very simple principle that everybody should know and talk about, but not many people have heard of probably. It's called the feel good, do good principle. When we feel good inside ourselves, we naturally do good in the sense of being kind and friendly to the people around us. And so what Carl said about loving ourselves before we try and love someone else is absolutely true. And it was a humanistic psychologist, Erich Fromm, F-R-O-M-M, Erich Fromm, who left Germany when Hitler came to power, because Erich Fromm was Jewish and a psychoanalyst, and he knew that Hitler was not going to do good things for him if he stayed there. So he intelligently came to the United States and started writing books. And one of the points that Erich Fromm made was that in the past, people have regarded loving one's self as being selfish. They've labeled self-love as being selfish and therefore a bad thing. And that the only good kind of love was love for somebody else. And that you should be selfless. You should not think about yourself. You should just ignore your own happiness and focus exclusively on the happiness of other people. And Erich Fromm pointed out that that actually psychologically doesn't work, because people who don't love themselves don't naturally treat other people in a kind and friendly way. They have to force themselves to do it. It doesn't come naturally. But if people do love themselves, then if we feel good about ourselves, there's no reason for us to be mean to other people. The people who are mean to other people are always the people who don't love themselves deep down inside. And we should feel sorry for them. And, we shouldn't necessarily associate with them very much, but, we should recognize that they're mean to other people because they don't love themselves. And so they have been damaged when they were growing up. And it's important to repair that damage and not just say, oh, we're going to automatically love ourselves just by saying, I love myself. And I'm a great person. There's a thing called self-esteem, which means, oh, I'm a great person, I'm talented, I'm intelligent, I can do anything I want, I'm good looking, I'm better than everybody else, blah, 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 blah. That kind of self-esteem, that's not self-love. Self-love is when you actually feel good inside yourself and you accept yourself just the way you are. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be the better than anybody else in order to be good. It's not a competition between other people and ourselves. In fact, the most important quality that we can have to be a good person and to deserve love is to be a loving person, to be a good-hearted person. If we have the intention of doing good in the world in the sense of helping other people be happier in the world whenever we can. Whenever it's natural and easy for us to be able to be kind and nice and helpful to someone else, we will do that. That's our intention as we go through life. And that's the most important part of being a good person. But we have to feel good inside ourselves before we can really have that kind of an intention to be friendly and kind to other people. So that's why I've been making these videos, because I want to share with everybody who's interested the ways that I myself found to make myself actually feel good. Feel good physically, feel good emotionally, feel good in my consciousness and my intelligence, so that I was not filled with inner conflict against myself, but I had a feeling of peacefulness with myself and calm within myself. And that doesn't just happen by wishing that it would happen, or by repeating affirmations to ourselves about how great we are. It actually takes learning to feel good physically, to pay attention to our body and learn how to relax the tense muscles in our body so that we can begin to feel our body again, and learning how to calm down our emotional brain so that we're not anxious and upset. And this is the thing that most people, this is the key element in most people's character that makes it hard for them to love themselves and other people, is that their emotional brain is not relaxed. It's tense. There's a lot of suppressed anger there. There's a lot of suppressed fear and sadness there. And we need to let out those feelings, express them, not hold them bottled up inside ourselves, because they're like emotional poisons if we keep them bottled up inside ourselves. And they keep poisoning our whole character if we don't express them. So we need to get the anger out, the fear, and the sadness. And once we've done that, then we can learn how to calm down our emotional brain, calm down our emotions, and feel relaxed. And feeling relaxed is the key. My sex positive program for expanding our sexual pleasure begins with body-mind relaxation. And body-mind relaxation assisted by cannabis, if you live someplace where you can get access to cannabis safely. We need to relax our body, we need to calm our emotions, and we need to learn how to calm down our mind. We need to focus our attention so that our attention is not zigzagging from one thing to another all the time, jumping like a monkey from one tree to another, from one branch to another. But we can steady our focus of attention and at the same time learn how to minimize the fog of thought activity in our consciousness. Minimize the amount of thinking that our brain is doing, the amount of thought images that our brain is generating at each moment. Our brain generates two types of thought image: visual images and the voice in our head. And so we need to learn how to let those visual thought images kind of evaporate, which then allows us to see the outside world clearly and distinctly and undistorted by our own thoughts. So we need to clear away those visual thought images and simultaneously quiet down this constant chatter in our head where we're talking to ourselves all the time, and get that to be quiet too. And so that's nurturing our consciousness by focusing our attention and minimizing the thought process. And then we can be aware of our field of consciousness as a stabilized, coherent field of consciousness that all hangs together, and our body sensations are part of that. So our body and our consciousness are connected, our thoughts are minimized, and our attention is focused. So to learn to love ourselves is to nurture ourselves, to cultivate ourselves. Self-cultivation is what the process of body-mind relaxation is called in the ancient Chinese Taoist tradition, for instance. But love is nurturing. Love is nurturing other people. If you take a baby and you love a baby, you nurture it. If you take a child and you love a child, you nurture the child. If you have a partner as an adult, a love partner, you nurture your partner. You help your partner feel better, and you help yourself feel better. So nurturing ourself is a process that we need to be actively doing, making ourselves feel better, making our consciousness feel better by calming our consciousness and steadying it, and making our body feel better by relaxing all the muscles in our body. And then we need to nurture our sexuality. Our sexuality is a very important part of our whole being, our whole self. And the sexual pleasure generating system that is in our emotional brain and that extends down into our body, it's important that we learn how to use that sexual pleasure generating system in a way to give ourselves as much sexual euphoria and pleasure as we want to have. And this is also something that doesn't happen automatically. It takes practice. First, we have to get really relaxed. because sexual arousal comes from the relaxation circuits of our emotional brain and what's called the autonomic nervous system that extends from the brain down to the sexual organs, that opens up the blood vessels and allows blood to flow into the sex organs, producing sexual arousal. Sexual arousal is an emotional response. And we can have that emotional response of sexual arousal most easily if we are relaxed rather than anxious. The anxiety circuits operate the other half of our autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight half of our autonomic nervous system, and the anxiety circuits, if they are active in our emotional brain, can short circuit the sexual arousal circuits. It's as though you had a radio, and if the anxiety circuits are on, the anxiety circuits are just creating static on the radio, and all you can hear is static. This is like if you're getting, radio waves through the air, and there's a lot of electricity in the air or something. Extra noise, basically, electrical noise, creates this static, and you can't hear the signal of the station that you're trying to listen to that's broadcasting out there. That signal is like sexual arousal. The sexual arousal's out there, it wants to be broadcast to us, but the anxiety is creating so much static in the system that the sexual arousal signals can't get through. And you can't hear the music, you can't hear the sexual arousal music at all because the anxiety is blocking it. So that's why genuine relaxation, deep relaxation of the body and the emotional brain and consciousness is essential for experiencing high levels of sexual euphoria. The more relaxed we are, the more we can absorb high levels of sexual energy in our consciousness. The more relaxed we are, the easier it is for our emotional brain to immerse itself in whatever sexy stimulus we are taking advantage of to become turned on by. It can be an external stimulus like watching a porn video. It can be an external stimulus like being with an actual partner, or it can be an external stimulus like by fantasizing a situation that is sexy. Now, what has to happen is that whatever that sexual arousal stimulus is that's coming toward us, it has to match the recognition circuits, the sexual recognition circuits, the sexiness recognition circuits in our emotional brain. Our emotional brain, already when we are born, has genes that will cause it to grow nerve circuits that are ready to recognize certain types of stimulation, certain types of partners, certain types of activity as being a sexy partner and a sexy type of activity, and therefore creating a sexual situation which deserves an emotional response of sexual arousal. So we've got innate circuits already, sexual recognition circuits in our emotional brain, ready to recognize a sexy partner, recognize some kind of sexy activity, and respond by turning on the sexual arousal circuits in the emotional brain that send sexual arousal output to the body, to the sex organs, to cause them to become filled with blood and turned on, erection, clitoral erection, vaginal lubrication. And at the same time, that emotional output from the emotional brain goes to consciousness and makes us feel the euphoric feeling of being turned on. Being turned on itself is a pleasurable sensation. And at the same time, the emotional brain gives us the urge to experience more of that pleasurable sensation by immersing ourselves more deeply in the sexy situation, whether it's real or imagined or virtual. We immerse ourselves in the sexy situation, and at the same time, we begin giving ourselves sexual pleasure, physical sexual pleasure, one way or another in the situation. And the physical sexual pleasure plus the emotional arousal energy and that euphoria fills the brain with sexual bliss. And if we're tense, when this happens, when the emotional brain sends out a sudden surge of emotional arousal energy, and we get that surge of energy up into our consciousness and down into our sexual organs, it triggers an orgasm very quickly. Rapid ejaculation occurs, a rapid orgasm occurs when we're tense, because our consciousness cannot absorb a large amount of sexual pleasure energy. A sudden burst of sexual pleasure energy comes in, it's all that our brain can handle. The energy gets rebounded back down to the orgasm control center, which flips the switch for the orgasm reflex, and that makes the muscles in our pelvis, sends nerve impulses down to those muscles, making them contract repeatedly in the contractions of orgasm. And then sex is over for a man if he's had an orgasm. So relaxation of the body and of consciousness and of the emotions means that sexual arousal can take place gradually, and sexual pleasure can arise a little more gradually. And whenever we get a special surge of emotional arousal energy, we can allow that energy to flow out into our consciousness in all directions and let it kind of go off into the ether without trapping it. And that way we avoid triggering the orgasm reflex. We let the energy, instead of trapping the energy, we let it flow out into all parts of our consciousness and then on out, as far as it wants to go. And we may breathe and sigh in order to discharge a certain amount of that energy. But it doesn't come back down and trigger the orgasm reflex. And that means that if we stop our sexual physical pleasure at that time, and if we clear our mind of sexual thoughts at that time and try to just go into a state of sort of Zen meditation where we're simply feeling the bliss cloud expand and dissipate, once the bliss cloud has dissipated and our sexual pleasure level has dropped down to a more reasonable level, then we can resume sexual activity and wait for the next surge of sexual arousal to come up and repeat this process for a long time until eventually we can be having continual sexual activity for long periods of time without having an orgasm until we're ready to. And then when we're ready to have an orgasm, we do something especially sexy, or we think about something especially sexy in relation to our partner or in relation to our fantasy. We do something and we don't hold back. We keep fantasizing about that. We keep thinking about that. We keep focusing on that and keep giving ourselves sexual pleasure. And then that will trigger an orgasm. And because we have already involved our entire consciousness in the sexual bliss cloud, the orgasm then will radiate out through our entire consciousness. When the muscles contract in the pelvis at the base of the sex organs, those contractions send a surge of sexual pleasure up. The orgasm pleasure comes up to the consciousness, and it fills our entire consciousness. Each surge fills our entire consciousness, and that feels like it's filling the entire universe. And so that's what I call a cosmic orgasm. And that's the ultimate goal of this program, of trying to help you actualize your full potential for sexual pleasure. Now, when we love ourselves, when we nurture ourselves and love ourselves, we need to accept our sexuality just as it is, realistically, and not be fighting our sexuality. Each of us has a unique emotional learning history for sex. That is, we've had sexual experiences throughout our life that have taught us emotionally to be turned on by specific things, and particularly things that we were turned on by in our earliest sexual experiences. There is a process called sexual imprinting, which means that in childhood, and especially around puberty, the sexual experiences that we have during those periods of our life are going to imprint themselves in our emotional brain as emotional memories that are closely associated with sexual arousal and sexual pleasure. So our earliest sexual experiences are very important. They engrave deep memories in our memory banks. And so the emotional turn-ons that we have as adults are very often the turn-ons that we learned at an early age, whatever they happened to be. And we should not judge our sexual turn-ons negatively, even if society in general, the general standards of approval and disapproval don't approve of the things that happen to turn us on. And let me just talk about two types of turn-ons that our society in general tends to discourage and to try and shame people for. We live in a society of sexual shaming, and that's the default mode. And before the sexual revolution that came along during the psychedelic counterculture in about 1968, before that, sexual shaming was about all kinds of sex. And you couldn't even talk about sex openly. Sex was such a shameful topic. And since the sexual revolution, we can talk about a lot more things, fortunately. And a lot of things that were formerly considered shameful, are now accepted, at least by progressive people. Conservative people who want to hang on to the old standards are still going to be judging us negatively. The two kinds of turn-ons that I want to talk about particularly, there are many kinds of turn-ons that society frowns on, but let's just take two of them. Same-sex attraction and same-sex sexual activity, men with men, women with women, and family member fantasies, having fantasies about and having sexual attraction to members of our own family. There has been a gay pride movement, ever since 1969 and the Stonewall riots, and the gay and lesbian pride movement, and all the other intersexual, transgender, and so forth. There are basically pride movements for people who are asexual, who have no sexual desires of any sort and wish they did. People who are intersexed, who have sex organs of both genders or an intermediate sort of thing. People who are transgender, who feel like they're a woman trapped in a man's body or a man trapped in a woman's body. And so that's transgender or transsexual. And then by gay, lesbian, and bi, and all that. the whole rainbow, most sexual turn-ons are covered by that, but not family member attraction turn-ons. And that's why I have been talking about my own personal experience, because first, it's true. I don't invent anything about my own personal history. Everything that I tell you about my personal history is absolutely true and actually happened. And it's mine. It belongs to me, and therefore I think I have the right to share it with you. You don't have to listen. You can always turn the video off. But I feel it's important to be honest about my own sexual development, which was very interesting because it was focused on my mother and on media figures, actresses like Gina Lollobrigida as the Queen of Sheba in Solomon and Sheba, and many other movie actresses, and then other women that I happened to see. I didn't remain fixated on my mother by any means. However, when I was first learning to have orgasms, she and Gina Lollobrigida were the two figures, the two women whom I fantasized about. My mother, because she was part of my family, and she would walk around the house naked or in lingerie, in very sexy outfits, and she was proud of her body, and she liked to have her body admired. And so in 1960, which is when I hit puberty and first started having orgasms, there were no other naked women in my universe at all. Gina Lollobrigida came closest in her fertility dance costume, some of the things that she wore in that movie, Solomon and Sheba, where she played the Queen of Sheba. So she was all sort of nearly naked. That was, very close. But I had, at the age of, 11 3/4, I had access only to movies that would certainly be rated no more than PG-13 these days. And then my mother. So she became one of my first fantasy partners for when I was masturbating. And I would lie face down on my bed, naked, rubbing my penis on the mattress, imagining that I was rubbing my penis on my mother's naked stomach. I'd imagined that I had gone to her and said, "Mommy, let's rub." And she would know what I meant, and she would take off her clothes. We would lie down on her bed, and I would lie down on top of her and rub my penis on her naked tummy and her pubic mound, and in her beautiful golden pubic curls, and I would come. And so I was able to enjoy these sexual fantasies without any guilt, without any conflict whatsoever. Why? How was I able to enjoy fantasizing about having a sexual experience with my mother without feeling any guilt, any shame, or any embarrassment about it? It was because my father was so sexually uptight, and the whole Christian culture. My father was a minister, a Presbyterian minister. And he was so deeply ashamed of sexuality, he would never talk about it. So none of the adults did I ever hear anybody talking about sex. I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know that sex was the way that we reproduce. I had been told, my mother told me that, an angel puts the baby in the mommy's tummy, and then it grows there and she gives birth. And even though I was 11 3/4 years old, I believed everything my parents told me. So I didn't think that sex or rubbing my body against a woman's body had anything to do with having babies. And my orgasms, I didn't think they had anything to do with having babies. I didn't worry about what my semen was. All I knew was that this was the most enjoyable and pleasurable thing that I had ever discovered in my life. It was a whole new level of pleasure and enjoyment that life had not offered before, and I had discovered this, and I loved it. I could hardly wait to go to bed every night. Right after dinner, I'd say, "Can I please go to bed?" Because I wanted to go and have another wonderful orgasm. It was because I was completely sexually ignorant, that I was completely sexually innocent, and I felt no guilt about my sexual activities whatsoever. And so fantasies involving my mother or women resembling my mother. This is what sexual imprinting is. That fantasies or sexual activity, or watching videos with anyone that resembled my mother, this is a deep turn-on, is a primal turn-on for my emotional brain, because that's what I learned during those first few months of having orgasms, before I was made to feel guilty about masturbating, and that kind of helped fuck everything up. It created a lot of internal conflict and tension within me, and anxiety, and it made me a lot more anxious and tense than I had been before. When I was given the standard, Christian anti-sex point of view, that all sex was bad, that masturbation was bad, that you have to wait until you get married to have sex. It was too late for that. I mean, I'd already learned how to have great sex, but now I just felt guilty about it afterwards, and I struggled to not do it. Before I did it, I tried to stop myself from doing it, keep myself from doing it, because it was supposed to be such a terrible thing. But my emotional brain already remembered the pleasure of orgasm and how great it was, and wanted to experience it again. And my biological sex drive, which was emanating from my testes that were producing testosterone, and the testosterone was going to my emotional brain, and the testosterone was making the sexual circuits of my emotional brain hungry for sexual pleasure. Just like when our blood sugar drops too low, we get hungry for food. Well, when our testosterone is high and we haven't had an orgasm and satisfied our sex drive, then the sexual circuits of our emotional brain are actively looking for sexual stimulus and sexual opportunities for sexual pleasure. So then, this sets up a constant conflict within a person's emotional brain. But before that, I had many orgasms thinking about my mom, and those memories of great pleasure from that fantasy activity became deeply engraved in my emotional brain. And so for my entire life now, anytime that there's a sexual situation with a woman who resembles my mother in a couple of specific ways, blonde, very attractive, and older, at least she was 36 when I hit puberty, and she was a very youngish looking 36. She was, absolutely at her peak ripeness of beauty, although she maintained that for a number of years. And so that's the sexual stimulus. That's the kind of sexual stimulation that turns on my emotional brain most powerfully, because that was the sexual imprinting that occurred during puberty. During puberty is when our sexual circuits are developing most actively. They have come fully online. The sexual circuits have been there all our life, but they've only been moderately active until we hit puberty. And at puberty, the sex hormones coming from our sex organs come to the brain. Those hormones have receptor sites on all of the sexual circuits. And when the hormones land on the receptor sites of those nerve cells, they make those nerve cells grow and become more active and connect with each other. And all of a sudden, we've got a full-blown sex drive in a way that was not there a year or so earlier, that had been gradually developing. But now, all of a sudden, it's fully online, and those sexual circuits are fully capable of becoming aroused and having orgasms and having the memory of those orgasms. And those first memories that we lay down in our emotional memory banks at the beginning of puberty and during puberty, the first sexual experiences we have are going to be strong turn-ons for us for the rest of our life. This is assuming that there's no fear or coercion involved with those first experiences. If some older person has forced us into a sexual situation that we did not ourselves look for or ask for, and that it frightens us to do this and we're not ready for it, and it sort of shocks us and is disturbing to us, then our first sexual experiences are not going to be completely pleasurable or completely happy memories. See, I was lucky. I had completely happy memories of rubbing my penis on my mom's tummy in my fantasy, because I had no guilt associated with it at all. Just the pure pleasure, because to me, it was nothing more than a physical activity. It had nothing to do with reproduction or anything else. So, one type of problem we can have with our first sexual memories is if there is abuse involved, some older person who is forcing us into an unhappy, frightening sexual situation. That can lay down disturbing types of memories. The other thing that can happen is what's happening in the purity culture of Christianity now, is that they are starting to tell kids at a very young age, before they ever get to puberty, that sex is bad and that they should never allow themselves to become sexually turned on and do any kind of sexual activity. They're telling them that even before they reach puberty, that they're telling them they must wait to have all sexual activity until they get married at some distant point in the future. So this kind of sexual miseducation, this kind of anti-sexual education, can hamper people's emotional brains. It can make them feel so ashamed of sexual feelings that when they hit puberty and start having sexual feelings, they are so ashamed of it that every time a sexual feeling starts to come up, they shut themselves down. They shut down those sexual feelings of arousal by shaming themselves and blaming themselves for having that and saying, no, that's bad and that's sinful. And they develop a habit of shutting down their sexual arousal every time it comes up. And so they don't learn how to allow themselves to become sexually aroused and have an orgasm the way that they're supposed to learn when they reach puberty. In a natural human setting, where there's not all this social control over individuals' sexual behavior, particularly children's sexual behavior, in a sex-positive human society, like the traditional societies of Polynesia, or the Trobriand Islands near New Guinea, or a people called the Muria people in central India, who have a little community dormitory for all the young people. In all of these cultures, The young people are not prevented from engaging in natural sexual exploration of each other's bodies when they are youngsters, between the ages of 3 and 7, let's say. They will have a natural curiosity about the other sex's body. In Polynesia, the kids all ran around, in traditional Polynesia, the kids all around went running around naked. They all ran around naked, up until like the girls were 6 or 7, then they would put on a grass skirt, and the boys would run around naked until they reached puberty and got circumcised. So there was no need for children to have any doubt about what the body of the other sex looked like. You may recall I tried to find out. I tried to find out with other little girls on 2 occasions what they looked like. And both of the little girls were quite willing to let me look at their body, and I was going to show my body to them. But on both occasions, their mother interfered. The girl's mother interfered and stopped the activity. So I was unable to see a little girl's body at all when I was that age. So the only naked female body I ever saw was my mother's, and I saw her naked body from an early age on up. So it's not surprising that my emotional brain imprinted on her. But to get back to a natural human upbringing, a natural human sexual upbringing in a sex-positive society where the adults are supportive of their young people learning how to experience sexual pleasure so that they will, as adults, be able to fully actualize their potential for sexual pleasure. The adults are supportive of children's sexuality instead of trying to prohibit and suppress it entirely. So children would learn the difference between the male and female body at a very early age. It would be natural to them to know. They would have no more curiosity about it. And then they also would be around adults who were, in fact, having sex. The adults in those cultures, the family lived in one big room. And the children were able to observe the adults having sex at night. And it was a natural thing to be around adults who were having sex. It wasn't a forbidden thing at all. It was part of life, and so there was no big mystery about it. And the children weren't thinking that it was a big traumatic deal to have sex. No, for them it was a natural thing. And then when the children approached puberty and beyond, they were allowed to have natural sexual learning experiences with the kind of partners that they preferred to be with. In Polynesia, a young boy's first sexual experience was with an older woman who was married to one of his male relatives. So she would be an aunt or the wife of a cousin or something like that. And this woman would initiate the boy. She was an experienced sexual partner, and so she would help the boy feel relaxed and comfortable, and he would be looking forward to it. He would have no anxiety about it. He would not feel that it was sinful or bad in any way, because that wasn't part of the Polynesian religion. The Polynesian gods didn't care about people's sexual activity. That wasn't a concern of theirs. So Polynesians didn't feel religiously sinful about having sex. So the young boy would be initiated by an experienced older woman. And he would have a great time, and she would teach him how to not come too soon, how to delay his ejaculation so that he could make love to his partners long enough to satisfy them and give them orgasms. And once he was well schooled, then he would start having dates with girls his own age. And throughout his teenage years, he would have different relationships with girls until he finally got serious about one of them, and they settled down and got married. In the Trobriand Islands, it was the same thing. The young men had their own little bachelor houses, basically, with bunks in there, and their girlfriends would come over at night and sleep with them. And there would be several couples in the same little bachelor apartment, little hut. They would not exchange partners. They each had their own partner and had sex with her. And then the two of them would go their separate ways at dawn in the morning. They would only get together at night for sex. And the interesting thing is that the boys and girls, the young men and women could have sex together, but they were not allowed to eat together. It was sort of just the opposite of us, where we go out to dinner first, and then after you've had dinner a number of times, maybe then you go to bed with each other. It was just the other way with them. You could go to bed with a woman, as a young woman, as long as you wanted, as much as you wanted, but you could not eat with her until you were going to marry her, because eating was a symbol of being part of a family and of the formal arrangement of marriage. Then in the Murya people of India, they had an institution known as the Ghotul, Ghotul, the Ghotul, where children, when they became about 6 or 7 years old, and they were living at home, and they were watching their parents have sex, they were getting pretty interested in the parents having sex, and they were being aware of what was going on there. And so the parents said, okay, we don't want to be distracted with you kids at night. So from now on, you kids, you go sleep in the Ghotul. The Ghotul was the very large hut, very large building, one big room. And all the young people from the age of 6 or 7 onward slept every night in the Ghotul. And the Ghotul was its own little organization. There was a dorm daddy and a dorm mommy, and they were basically the oldest teenagers in the group. They were the ones responsible for keeping order, and the young people would pair off gradually, and as they got older, the girls were massaging the guys. The guys were working out in the fields all day doing the hard physical labor, and so the girls would massage them at night before they went to bed together. And they would sleep together for a long time before they had sex. But then eventually, the girl and the boy would feel about ready for that. And it was always the girl's decision when she felt ready to have sex with the boy, then she would let him know. And after that, they didn't necessarily have sex every night. They still slept together every night, but it was only when the girl wanted to have sex that they would have sex together. And so they started this when they reached their critical period of development for sexual learning, which is around puberty. So they were having normal sex, not masturbation, not fantasy sex, and not abstinence. They were having just regular, doing exactly what their emotional brains wanted them to do. They were not fighting their emotional brains. They were, in fact, doing what their emotional brains wanted. This is what the psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich, R-E-I-C-H, some people pronounce it Reich, but it's correctly Reich, Wilhelm Reich, the sex-positive psychologist, said children should be self-determining sexually. They should determine for themselves what it is that they want to do sexually, because that way they're not going to traumatize themselves. They're only going to participate in events that they want to participate in, and Sex is a naturally self-rewarding activity, so they're naturally going to learn to enjoy sex because as long as no one's making them feel ashamed of it and no one's punishing them for it and they're not having to hide it and they don't have any guilty conscience, they can just enjoy it and they can do what comes naturally. And then when they grow older, they marry someone, usually from a different village. And then they go on to live a married life. And they have learned about sex before they enter their married life. So their married sex life is good right from the start. So let's contrast that kind of natural sexual upbringing where the adults don't interfere with the young people, where the adults help the young people learn how to have sex well. By the way, going back to Polynesia, an older woman would initiate the younger boys, the young men who've just had their circumcision performed at the age of puberty. The older women would initiate the young boys, and what about the girls? They would be courted by older teenage boys, and the girls would choose which of these older teenage boys they wanted to have for their experience, for their first sexual experience. And it wouldn't be an inexperienced person. It would be a young man who knew what he was doing and could give the woman a very good experience, so she would have a good experience right from the start as well. So, contrast that with our own culture, where the adults try to prevent young people from having sexual activity as much as possible. What we're going to learn is not natural sexuality. We're going to do a kind of sexual imprinting on whatever opportunities we happen to have, which includes family members, being attracted to family members, either siblings or parents. And so many of us are going to have attractions to family members simply because they're the ones with whom we're on the most intimate terms, living in the same house and being close to them all the time. So if we're going to love ourselves sexually, we have got to be able to say, okay, my attraction for family members, for a particular family member usually, this attraction developed very naturally. It developed inevitably. It was the sexiest situation that my emotional brain was directly exposed to. This was the sexiest person of the sex that my emotional brain is attracted to. This is the sexiest person that I was, most intimate with in my life, and so it was natural for my emotional brain to imprint on this person, a parent or a sibling. And if we're going to love ourselves as adults, we have to accept the fact that that's the way our particular sexual history happened to develop. And we learned this sexual attraction to a family member very naturally by the natural psychological and emotional processes of learning. We just learned to enjoy whatever sexual stimulation happened to be available to us. And we have to not feel ashamed about this, even if society tries to make us feel ashamed about it. Just like if we happen to have an emotional brain that is attracted to a member of the same sex, or is attracted to people of the same sex, all right? Perhaps we have inherited certain genes that have constructed nerve circuits in our emotional brain that respond with sexual arousal to people of our own sex. This is not something that we can change. This is not something that we can unlearn or learn something different. That's a basic thing that's built into our emotional brain. And so we're going to have to learn to accept and enjoy the fact that the people we're attracted to happen to be members of our own sex. What we have to do is just find members of our own sex who are also attracted to members of our sex, and then we'll be happy. And we have to love ourselves sexually by accepting whatever it happens to be that our particular emotional brain gets turned on by. And here's the final point that I'm going to make. If we say, love your neighbor as yourself is a good rule, then what we have to say is this. If we're going to love our own sexuality and accept our own sexuality, whatever it happens to be, we need to feel the same way about other people. That is, if we love them, we want them to be happy. And what that means is, whatever their emotional brain happens to be turned on by, that's what's going to make them happy. Whoever it is that they are genuinely attracted to, that's what's going to make them happy. So if I want to be happy by loving my own sexuality and accepting that the kind of sexual partners I'm attracted to happen to be this kind of person, I need to extend the same kind of respect and love to my neighbor, which means everyone else on the planet. All of us are human beings. All of us are equal. All of us have the right to be sexually happy. And what that means is allowing a person to enjoy their own sexuality, whatever it happens to be, because that's what makes them happy. And that's what we want, is for them to be happy. That is loving your neighbor. Okay, thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.